Welcome to Working for Women, the Independent Women's Forum podcast, where we are changing the conversation about women and public policy for the better.
Hello, my name is Patrice Nwoka, and I'm a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. So do you remember Schoolhouse Rock and ABC after-school specials? I mean, how many of you would race downstairs on Saturday mornings to your family room to watch cartoons for hours when you were growing up? I certainly did. Now, our kids today will probably never appreciate doing that. They probably won't even appreciate those mini animated shows with catchy tunes about how bills become laws, because honestly, today we have so much more access to kids' educational programs at any time, from PBS Kids to YouTube Kids, and lots of other options out there. So what's interesting is that technology has expanded the amount of content our children can consume, but regulations governing children's program on broadcast TV just has not kept up. So our special guest today wants to drag those regulations from the 90s into this decade. We have with us Commissioner Michael O'Reilly. He's a federal communications commissioner, and he wants to reform so-called KidVid regulations to give broadcasters greater flexibility in how they comply with mandates on educational program. Commissioner O'Reilly, what a pleasure it is to welcome you to our program today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Terrific. Now, so let's just begin. Help our listeners understand how kids programming on broadcast is currently regulated.
Sure. So children's television programming, as you mentioned, better known as KidVid, starts from a 1990 statute by Congress, Children's Television Act. And from that, the FCC imposed regulations, mainly in 1996 and 2004, a little bit in 2006. And we ratcheted up the obligations on local broadcast stations in terms of what they're required to offer and when. And so today, a local broadcast station has to offer on average 3 hours of children's television per week that is regularly scheduled, 30 minutes in blocks, can't be less than 30 minutes, and air between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. There's a number of reporting requirements in terms of looking back and looking forward, that the total package keeps broadcasters from having flexibility to offer different things that may come up or address the fact that the consumers in the marketplace may be looking for more news. And what you've seen is the FCC rules have dumbed down the programming overall.
What's interesting about that is, when I look at TV Saturday morning programming, for example, kids programming, it's really different than when I grew up in the 80s. I mean, I remember those short animated videos or the different varieties of kids programming. But now I think about it, children today don't access their educational programming the way they did back in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. And so, can you talk a little bit about just how the market has responded in providing these different types of educational programming?
No, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why the Commission needs to revise its rules. The marketplace for children's television programming has exploded in the last many years. Not only do you have children's television, children's programming that is dedicated just to children, cable programming that's dedicated just to children, but you have a plethora of over-the-top providers and online providers that are trying to address consumer and children's needs on a daily basis, whether it be actual programming live or video content that's available for pull down as they so need, as my child does, loves to pull from the libraries and binge watch a number of programs in a row rather than having a set time on Saturday morning. And so that's why we have to revise our rules. The marketplace has changed dramatically, and broadcasters are stuck behind the time because of the FCC.
I know my stepson, he's 6 years old almost, and he definitely does not just stick to television broadcast watching, so I understand. And I think a lot of the moms out there will appreciate that too. Now let's talk a little bit about the reforms you have in mind. Can you talk about maybe the top 3 reforms? I certainly read through everything, but I'm sure our listeners may not have time, but we'd love to know what are those top 3 reforms that you would like to see?
Sure. So the first and foremost is we're going to take comment. The item that we released publicly last Thursday, will be hopefully adopted at our July meeting, and July 12th. Hopefully the full commission will endorse this, and we'll take comment for the next couple of months. And the top 3 items in my mind are asking questions on all the different components I already talked about that are sitting in our rules today: the 30-minute block, the regularly scheduled, the 3-hour requirement, and all our paperwork obligations. All those things we're going to take comment and say, should it still look like this? Should it change? Number 2, we're going to ask the question and really tease out, is it possible that we could have a broadcaster switch from its primary signal, where its children's television is located today, to its D2 or D3 channel? So therefore, it can offer different things on its primary signal while making sure that it notifies parents and families of where children's television can be found. And for those families that watch it today that do like that, there are some, and we want to make sure it's a small population, obviously, but we do want to make sure we don't try to harm those that may enjoy this programming. So we want to have a place, give them the option to put this programming. And the third thing I would say is we ask questions on something that's actually allowed in this actually allowed in the statute, and that is whether local broadcasters can sponsor programming on another channel within the marketplace, and they can pool dollars together for purposes of making one station or other stations more children friendly. So can they increase the children television programming on another channel by sponsoring it, rather than trying to everyone do it themselves? Maybe there's an opportunity to have one be more kid friendly than the others, and then give them some freedom to offer other programming instead.
So it sounds to me like coming out of this, some of the reforms, the impact of your reforms could be greater flexibility for the broadcasters, obviously, but maybe even greater a variety or access to different types of broadcast programming in different ways. Are there other implications you can see for families if these reforms are implemented?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that is the flexibility and better opportunity for children. That's what we're trying to get at. There'll be claims making that I'm against children or I'm trying to kill off children's television. That's not true. We're just trying to, address the marketplace today and make it better environment for everybody in the process. I'm sure, there'll be advocates who will disagree with where we're going, and that's why we're starting the process and initially with an NPRM, so we're taking comments. So I really don't think people should object at this stage. This is about collecting comments and just seeing where to go from here.
Well, you introduced some of the potential opponents or people who might criticize these efforts. What do you think that some of the opponents or critiques of this reform could be?
Well, one in particular has been raised is, what do you do with those families that only have over-the-air programming today? They don't have the resources to go on to, they don't have a broadband subscription, they don't have cable television. What are you going to do for them? They rely on over-the-air today, programming today, and what happens going forward? And that's why we spent so much time trying to figure out this multicasting option. Well, if you can switch it to multicasting, you make sure they know where it is, you don't denigrate it. Is there an opportunity that gives more flexibility while not harming the program? So that's one of the biggest complaints and concerns we've had, and we try to address it head on.
And I appreciate that. I've read it, for example, from Senator Markey from Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts. I think he's concerned that there's a very big constituency of the low-income families who don't have access to cable or internet access at home. Do you have a sense of really how big that group is? Because maybe there's in addition to what you've laid out in terms of multi-channel access, but maybe there are other alternatives to target this particular group of viewers who wouldn't be able to access all of this content in any other ways. Do you have a sense of how big that audience could potentially be?
Yeah, so we're going to take comments, and hopefully people will provide more data. But the data point I've seen recently is 0.5% of households don't have that have over-the-air only today with families that they get it that distributed that mechanism. So it's a really small population, but we do care about that population. I'm not trying to harm it. I would say that those people who are worried about this, I'd say one of the first things you should look at what's happening on public television. They have an incredible offering of children's programming programming, many of that content is shifting over the years and going to cable and going to over the air. It's so good and so popular that it's expanding elsewhere. And so I just in Michigan talking to the local public broadcast station in East Lansing at Michigan State University, and we had a wonderful opportunity to see how many hours and hours that they're offering in public. The PBS system overall has been has a 24/7 kids channel that's available. Over 95% of America today is able to get this. And we're not talking on a primary signal from PBS in East Lansing, they're offering I think 57 or 58 hours a week, and on the 24/7 kids channel they're offering 160 hours a week of this content. So that totally pales in comparison, what a broadcaster is able to offer, and when we talk about 2 or 3 hours at this particular time and this particular slot. I would say public broadcasting is doing a wonderful job. It's part of their mission. That's where, as a family, that's where I turn to. And some of the programming that I see now on cable and other mechanisms is from public broadcasting. I think Thomas the Tank Engine and Elmo and a bunch of other things have migrated, and HBO is now doing Sesame Street. All the good things that public broadcasting has done in the past is now migrating.
That's terrific. I'm glad you highlighted that point. And I know a lot of our listeners, your kids grew up watching Elmo and Sesame Street, and now they're fans of Arthur and some of all those characters that they can access. And so I think that's a really good point to push back on critics who may fear that certain constituencies may get left behind or fall through the cracks. No, there's a lot of content through public broadcasting that they'd still be able to access. So, Commissioner, just one final question. If folks really want to weigh in on this and provide some comments, maybe some of their personal experiences or data that they may have access to, how can they do that?
So we have a pretty consumer-friendly filing mechanism here at the Commission, assuming that the item gets adopted at our July 12th meeting, which I think is a fair good shot. I spent my time trying to make this a very, reasonable approach, and I think that my colleagues will support it. But I think that, when we do that, if that happens, then consumers will have an opportunity, and viewers and your listeners will have an opportunity to file comments on our website. I don't want to advocate for that because I try to, let people do what they think is best. But those that are interested should feel free to submit their comments, and we do read them. The Commission does read all comments that are filed. I can't promise that I read every single one because depending on the scope of them, but we do read, someone does read every comment that's filed.
That's terrific. Well, Commissioner O'Reilly, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and breaking down what these KidVid proposal reforms really mean for viewers, for consumers, and also for the broadcasters and providing them greater flexibility. To our listeners out there, please check out a great op-ed written by Commissioner O'Reilly. It's in the Wall Street Journal, and it's called A Smarter Approach to Saturday Morning Cartoons. We actually link to it in a couple of pieces of commentary that I wrote on our website, so visit iwf.org as well. And don't forget, please like us on iTunes, rate us so that we can continue to attract new people to discover these conversations. And visit iwf.org for more analysis on politics, pop culture, and policy. We hope you'll tune in again.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, or stop by iwf.org for similar content.